Okay, I think that's a nice round number that we have here in the audience. And so I think we'll go ahead and get started so we can give most of the time to Jazmyn and Gary that you've come to see and hear. I'm Shamim Momin. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Henry Art Gallery. And welcome to this conversation between Jazmyn Scott and Gary Simmons. The program will be about an hour and there will be a little bit of time for questions at the end. So please, I think you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A throughout the talk. And we will get to them as soon as we get to that portion of the event. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that we at the Henry Art Gallery and the University of Washington live and work on the unceded lands of the Coast Salish peoples and the shared waters of all tribes and bands, named and unnamed, including Suquamish, Duwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. This land acknowledgement reminds us of our connections and indebtedness to the peoples and more than human kin where we live and work. As we spend the next hour or so together, we pay respects to elders past and present. So I'm going to begin by giving a little bit of an introduction, short introduction to Jazmyn and Gary, and then I will spend a few minutes just acquainting everyone with Gary's exhibition, The Engine Room, that's at the Henry Art Gallery. Normally we'd probably be in the gallery right now for this talk, so it will help, I hope, for all of you to have just a glimpse, those of you especially who haven't had a chance to be there on site in person, to have a glimpse of the show as we dive into conversation about their shared interests and investigations to music and music history. So we have with us today Jazmyn Scott. Jazmyn is the program manager at Langston, Seattle's hub for Black arts and culture, and the co-founder of 50 Next, Seattle Hip Hop Worldwide, a digital time capsule highlighting Seattle and Northwest hip hop. She's also the curator of the Legacy of Seattle Hip Hop exhibition at the Museum of History and Industry, which won the 2016 American Association for State and Local History Leadership in History Award. We also have with us Gary Simmons. Gary is an artist who uses icons and stereotypes of American popular culture to create works that address personal and collective experiences of race and class in media spanning painting, sculpture, installation, and interactive sculptural environments. He was born in New York in 1964, received his BFA from the School of Visual Arts in 1988, and his MFA from CalArts, studying under the tutelage of Charles Gaines, Michael Asher, John Baldessari, Catherine Lord, Mike Kelly, and others. Gary has exhibited nationally and internationally, including solo exhibitions at the California African American Museum in Los Angeles, the Detroit Culture Lab, the Perez Art Museum in Miami, the Museum of Modern Art in Fort Worth, and the Kunsthaus Zurich, as well as extensive group exhibitions, including the Venice Biennale, Prospect New Orleans, and at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, and the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, among many others. His work is also included in major museum collections across the globe, including those of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of Art, and the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. So we'll just dig right into the exhibition. Ian, if you might put up our first slide. Thank you so much. So actually, if we can go to the next. The work of Gary Simmons explores racial, social, and cultural politics and examines the ways in which we attempt to reconstruct the past via personal and collective memory. Simmons' practice has evolved over the past 3 decades to incorporate painting, sculpture, installation, and interactive architectural environments, and is occupied by the unfixed nature of an African-American past that remains open to the vagaries of memory, what was revealed, what was remembered, and what has been hidden, through pop cultural imagery from sports, music, film, and cartoons. In particular, music and music history figure prominently in this exhibition, refracted through the lens of racial identity and representation. We can go to the next slide. So for this exhibition, commissioned exhibition, so Gary created all of the work for this show, The Engine Room. He created a large-scale wall painting, a suite of new paintings and sculptures, and a sculptural installation, drawing together disparate components to create space for new interaction and invention. This wall painting, which, again, this is where not being there in person is hard because it is enormous and covers most of the entire wall of the large South Gallery at the Henry Art Gallery. This wall painting riffs on the artist's characteristic erasure drawings, in which he uses sprayed and physically manipulated chalk on blackboard paint to create ghostly images, in this case, of the lesser known recordings of Jimi Hendrix's 45 RPM records. And for those of you who remember, the smaller records that were just single hits and often had B-sides, which is the title of this piece, on the back, other songs that were less well known. We can go to the next slide. As well as part of the exhibition, there are 3 of these triptych paintings or poster panel paintings created over many years of research, in which Gary has been collecting and archiving band and concert posters from cities around the world in which he's worked, and including editions from Seattle as well. Then digitally reshaping, recomposing, recoloring, and then often adding another layer of physical intervention, as the printed pieces are then kind of collaged, sometimes rotated, ripped, and then painted on top of onto these panels. So there are 3 of these triptych components. Next slide, please. And the anchor of the exhibition is this large-scale garage schematic installation, in which those posters become a kind of single giant painting that you can see installed on the interior of the sculpture. The sculpture's entitled Garage Band. And again, recalls a schematic of a typical suburban garage, a space that evokes a site of creation, invention, experimentation, kind of that place where you tinker, the kind of casual tinkering to the genesis of major music movements and tech innovations. There's just stories abound of those, this being the site of that creation. As the exhibition title, The Engine Room, suggests, the installation will function as a generative interactive space. And this will be key to our conversation ongoing. So as both a private laboratory and a public stage, drawing on diverse historical and present day areas of the Seattle music scene, Garage Band, the sculpture, will be activated by a series of musician residencies over the run of the exhibition, tapping into influential genres and practices that are nonetheless atypically associated with the popular conception of the Seattle music scene. Next slide. And these residencies are co-organized by the Henry and Langston, and as I mentioned, an arts and culture organization that guides generative programs and community partnerships that centers Black art, artists, and audience, and honors the ongoing legacy of Seattle's Black Central area. So Jazmyn is the director there, as I mentioned, and we are doing 3 months of residencies. Each of the musician residencies occupies a month. We are currently in the first residents, who are the Black Tones. And I should mention that each of the residencies culminates in a public performance. Theirs will be broadcast on our YouTube channel on May 29th at 6 p.m. I'll remind you again at the end. But in the interim, before the public performance, the musicians have the opportunity to spend time in the space, to use it as a laboratory, use it as a creative, inventive space, again, as this sort of site that activates the sculpture and the exhibition overall. The other 2 residencies I should mention in June is Ishmael Butler of Shabazz Palaces and Diggable Planets, and in July features several artists in a Build-A-Band residency that revives the jambalaya, improvisational, and experimental jam sessions of Seattle music's recent past. So that's a very quick overview. There's lots more to say about it, but I'd like to now turn the conversation to Jazmyn and to Gary. To begin, maybe perhaps I'll just do a prompt to start us off to talk a little bit about your investment in music and music history, kind of how that came about and how it became central to your creative practice and thinking. Now I'll step off stage and cede to you two both.
Thank you, Shamim. That was a really nice introduction.
Thank you. Well, Gary, do you want to start?
I will let you start.
I feel like you're the guest of honor. I mean, you know, this is I'm working with folks in my hometown, and you know, I know you don't want the entire spotlight on yourself, but I think that folks are probably curious to know a little bit more about you and how music kind of intersects with your art. I have a ton of things that I want to talk to you about and question you, and we got to have a good little pre-conversation last week, and we have, a lot in common. But yeah, is there anything that you want to say about, your interest in music and its intersections with your art?
I think two things that always come that kind of energize or charge my work is music and film. And whenever an idea comes to me, I go to those sources for not only inspiration but research. And I think something like the garage is something I've always been curious about from a very young age, being around friends and friends of friends that had bands or spoken word or those folks were always kind of very close to me, and I was always like that weird visual artist guy on the side. So I think I've always been fascinated by the way that the idea of a group comes together. Being an artist working in the studio is something that generally you do by yourself. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's lonely, but it's about being alone with your thoughts and presenting those things. And bands, I think, and performers differ in the sense that one of the fascinating things is to watch four different egos and four different people. I'm using four as the kind of atypical band or group, come together and produce a single production. And what goes into it, I think the average person really doesn't realize what it takes to get folks together all on the same page, boats sailing in the right direction. So I think that was really the genesis for this piece, was to kind of peel back some of the layers on the onion and allow folks to see how a band practices or rehearses, or allowing themselves to fuck up in public
Right.
and even argue a lot of there's a lot of arguing that goes on in bands, and the drummer doesn't want to do it this way, the singer wants to take all the acclaim, whatever the argument is. Anybody that's in a band out there probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that's one of the very interesting things about listening to music. I think somebody like a producer like a Lee Perry or somebody like that was just sheer genius, where people would come to him and allow him to affect the sound because they wanted that sound, is a different kind of thing, but it's still a collaborative effort. So that's sort of where the idea of the piece comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I know. I mean, I was never in a band, so I don't want to give that impression. But I do know firsthand that it takes a special level of coordination.
Mm-hmm.
When you're working with a number of musicians towards making music, performing, recording, whatever that is, and so that's really intriguing to think about that as you're you're creating visual art. And this installation, I've never seen anything like it in person, and it was just amazing for me to walk into that space at the Henry and see. I mean, the garage is bigger than most typical two car garages. But it's that feeling. It's amazing to go into a gallery space and see a fully fabricated garage, decked out with these posters, with the sound equipment, and then, envisioning our residencies that are going to be coming throughout the next 3 months, and how they're going to utilize the space, and what it's going to look like for each residency, and how it's going to be similar or different. And so, kind of speaking of that particular installation, the garage band, First of all, one of my favorite, well, I love it all. I mean, it's just, it captures your eye, the colors, all that. But I love the custom fabricated equipment in those like wooden boxes. Um, they're just beautiful. In all honesty, I want this in my house. You know. Can you tell us just a little bit about like how you, because you had those made, you didn't do those yourself, right? Didn't you have those?
I have a fabricator that
Yeah.
I work with, and you know they're very carefully drawn and crafted over time. And I've always been obsessed with you know, every concert that I've been to, and there have been thousands. I'm obsessed with band speakers or whatever venue speakers. That's the first thing I would look at when I can remember going to Madison Square Garden to see, like, you know, a large arena show, and you know, some crazy band would be playing, like, you know, Van Halen or something, and they'd have these gigantic speaker boxes hanging from the ceiling, and you're just drawn to them as objects. And then, you know, growing up, I'm of West Indian descent. I'm first generation, and so the Jamaican sound system is in my blood, you know, and so I was always drawn to those big you know, subwoofers, and just they're just really beautiful objects. So when I started doing them, I once again I like collected as many images as I possibly could from every, you know, dub, reggae, uh, you know, performance or band, to, you know, early arena rock like Led Zeppelin. And you know, they had the, actually what was popular in the 70s and 80s was a speaker cabinet from a company called Orange, and the actual box was orange. And I always thought that was the most if I ever played guitar or bass, that's the system that I would want. So, you know, the box is such a aesthetic, a beautiful aesthetic object, that when I decided to do this, I really wanted it to be pared down and stripped down, and, you know, almost like show the construction of it, and, you know, that kind of structure to how something is made and produced. So it was really important that I worked side by side with the fabricator, and those guys are fantastic, tip top. So when I gave them, so, you know, a lot of times I'd give them an idea or a drawing what I'm looking after, and it wouldn't be right, and boom, we'd have to go back and do it again. And we didn't have to do too much of that, because they knew, and a lot of them actually played music that worked on it. So I usually try to seek folks out that have some kind of input on that end, and know, you know, so that there's this conversation that goes on between me and them when I'm trying to come up with an object.
Yeah, I mean they're like beautifully, like perfectly crafted, like intricate.
Thank you.
And I was just like touching it, and I was just,
What, you were touching it? No, okay.
Yeah, I touched your stuff.
Well, that's what, you know, truth be told, that's actually in, you know, the groups are invited to move the equipment around, you know what I mean? So we're joking about it, but I really want that kind of hands-on, you know, almost like the traces of their fingerprints touching it and moving it around. And, you know, if you want the PAs to come forward, bring them forward. If you want the, you know, the guitar amps go back, you know. There's even like a pad for a drum kit to be in there. So yeah, it's all about that touch.
The Black Tones who are in there currently, their drum set was in there when I visited, and you know, I can see that they've kind of made it their own for the time that they're in there, and that's what's so beautiful about the installation. And another cool thing that Ian at the museum actually mentioned to me was that the PAs, you know, you have the PAs with all your different stickers and everything. That, you know, if some of the artists that are coming through, if they have their stickers, you know, if they have stickers from their bands, whatever, they can add stickers to the piece.
Absolutely.
It's extremely interactive, and it's a space that you know, these groups and these artists can make their own, you know, without taking away from the integrity of what you've done with
Yeah.
it. So that's what's really, really cool. One of the many cool things.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you responded to it that way. I wanted I want that interaction. I want that, you know, if they, I know you can't do it, but if they decided to put, you know, their cigarette down on the thing, you know, well, that's how they perform. So, you know, they should feel very comfortable in there. You know, for the most part, I provided it, yes, but it is their space for that amount of time. So I want the Tones to be very, very comfortable to do whatever it is that they do. And that's kind of special to be able to have folks like that you revere, you know, come in and do their thing in something that you know, came up with on a little pencil sketch somewhere. It's really exciting.
So since you were commissioned to do this for the Henry, did you have local bands in mind? Where you make, well, and we'll talk about some of the Jimi Hendrix connections as well, especially with that particular B-sides piece. But you know, did you have Seattle music or a Seattle vibe in mind when you were putting together this installation for the Henry? Or
I mean,
was it a general kind of concept that you had been working on?
you know, I think when I came up with this piece, for me, there's certain cities that anybody, yourself, you know, around music, you don't have to play it necessarily. If you're an audiophile and you love music, there's a handful of cities that you think of that kind of define almost the way that you listen to music. You know, if you want go, then you're gonna go, you know, Baltimore and DC. You know, if you want punk rock, you know, hardcore punk rock, you know, there's a lot of scenes for that. New York, I grew up in New York, you know, New York hardcore was like, you know, a defining sound. If you wanted Chicago, you know, that Miami bass sound is another one, or you know, that laid back West Coast style of, you know, the north from like San Francisco up, I think is a different sound. And then, you know, as an artist, you want to, if you're doing something that relates to musicians, then those cities like Nashville, you know, Dallas, there's certain cities that come to mind that are what I define as like music cities. You know, Atlanta is like an amazing music city. And so, you know, like if I had my druthers and this thing was supposed to travel, I would probably try to move it through the Nashvilles, the Atlantas, the you know, Virginia, some of those cities that like are strong music cities that kind of get left out of the first table of what folks are thinking. And you know, yeah, I think so. When Shamim and I have worked together before, so we have a really, really great relationship. We're friends outside of the art world, but she and I have done some incredible projects together from the time she was at the Whitney. You know, she did something in LA called Land. So she's the kind of, Shamim's my girl. When she calls me up and she has an idea, I'm all in, chips to the middle from the jump. If she just says, Gary, I have an idea, boom, put me down. Because it's rare that you work with a curator that is so in tune with how you work and allows you the room to do the things that you do. And so Shamim just trusted me. She was like, hey, you know, come on up, look around. And I was like, Seattle, hell yeah. You know, like that's, you know, Seattle is I've always wanted to do stuff in Seattle. And, you know, even as far back as when I was a little dude and I would watch the Seattle Supersonics. Like, you know, like Seattle is just one of my favorite baseball players ever. Was Ken Griffey Jr. played in Seattle. So, you know, like Seattle was a thing for me. And obviously the music scene in Seattle is so diverse and so strong, and it covers, you know, 50 years. It goes back to the jazz, you know, there were jazz players that were doing their thing up there. And you know, then you got Hendrix, and then you know, move forward and you got like all the grunge thing going on, and the hip hop thing. It's just so, it's a beautiful fabric for music. So as this piece came together quite easily for me in a way. It was like, oh wow, I got an option to do something in Seattle. I'm doing music, man. I all in on music. So that's kind of how it really came about, was a love for the city. And then, you know, and then she took me around and I got to see the fish get thrown, you know, like all of that. It was kind of cool. You know, and I'm an Aries, I'm an April baby, so like the rain thing is like good to me. So like there's a lot of things about the city that I really love. So you know, UW is an amazing university. So, you know, the funny thing was that actually the project sort of changed and shifted, and I think that you know, COVID kind of jammed us up in a lot of ways, and we can get into all of that. You know, what the hell, we can get into it now. You know, I came to her with this idea. She said she wanted to do the big room, and I was like, great. And so we started down this path. And one of the things that mirrors a musician or a group of musicians is you have to be kind of flexible and fluid. You know, like you have to be able to move with the punches. You can't just stay rigid. Otherwise you're going to get knocked out. And I think that, you know, once we all got shut down, my immediate response, this is an interesting thing. My immediate response was to pull the plug and do it another time. And Shamim was adamant. She was like, no, we are doing this, and we're doing it now. And we need something like this that has these tissues that connect back into, you know, not only the student community, but the music community and the art community all coming together. And this piece has to happen. So Shamim actually really pushed me to say, let's do it now. And so then we said, okay, let's re-quarterback this thing. How are we going to do this? How do you do something that's all about performance and an audience and people coming into the space? How do you do that during a time of pandemic when everybody has to be distanced and all of this? And, you know, the one cool thing about doing this is, yeah, there are a lot of it's my ideas, but there's a lot of things that you kind of have to open up and start listening to a lot of other opinions. And I really enjoy that. It's a collaborative thing. I think that's the way that the garage works. You know, we set it up, and then hopefully the museum programs it. And, you know, so that's like where you come in and you do your thing, because you know the music scene. So you know the diversity that needs to happen. You know those lesser known artists that are, you know, incredible, that could really electrify that space. So, you know, you have to be able to kind of be comfortable working in a collaborative sort of way and allowing other voices to professionally do what they do. It's not only your way. It's like kind of myopic way of working. And I think that was really important during this time. I think it was, you know, the certain ideas that popped in, like, you know, well, what about streaming? What about doing a YouTube channel? What about a podcast? You know, like all of these things that I didn't really consider, but when it came up, it's like, that's an interesting idea. Let's try to move in that direction. Or, you know, a residency. Wow, that's dope. Let's do that. You know, it's a very interesting thing, and I'm very thankful for everybody that's been involved on this project. So I'm colonizing all the talking. So.
Colonizing. Well, no, I mean, this has just been a time of thinking outside of the box, and I'm with Shamim. Like, you know, I think when we're faced with something that we've never been faced with before, sometimes our natural instinct is to say, let's not do this because we can't do it in the way that we're used to doing things.
Yeah.
And you know, for me as a person that does a ton of programming for an organization and has just always done, you know, event production and things like that, you know, I went through that same thing last year where it was like, how am I, like, a big part of my job, I feel like, is bringing people together. You know, when it
Yeah.
comes to art in any form, um, I've always seen it as something that we come together to enjoy and experience.
Hmm.
And so I had to say, okay, we can still do that, but now we're doing it virtually for the most
Right.
part. You know, we're coming together in a different way,
Yeah.
in order to share these experiences. And so, you know, we went through a lot of that last year. But one of the first things, programs that we did virtually when we were like, all right, we got to figure this out, was a hip hop program. We partnered with another Black arts organization, Wanawari, here in the community. And we did a 7-week series, live stream series called 206 The Break. And it was all about Seattle hip hop, and bringing together DJs and then people we call like luminaries, just different folks that have been involved in the music scene, the hip hop music scene locally for a long time, or even a
Hmm.
little bit of time. And so we had DJs, 2 DJs, we would pair them up and assign them an era, and they would program all Seattle hip hop, um, in their sets. And so these DJs would kind of go back and forth, and they just be playing all this Seattle music. We started from the 80s and went on down to present time. Um, and then during the stream, we would bring 2 different people together to really talk about that era of music in Seattle. So they would talk
Hmm.
about not only the music that was being presented in those sets, but also just what was going on in Seattle at that time. You know, so it could have been anything from, you know, political issues, because, you know, we had WTO here locally, that, you know, all that stuff kind of feeds into hip hop,
Sure.
especially locally. Hip hop really has a strong voice in activism and things like that. And, you know, we did this program in a pandemic, and we launched it right after civil unrest, right after the George Floyd murder. So
Hmm.
there was and you know, Seattle was a huge city that, for protest last summer. So there was so much going on. But what we found was that bringing people together, even if it was virtually, through music, through art, was a way to like heal in many ways,
Absolutely.
for people to just take a break from all the stress and anxiety and just all these things that were going on around us, and just enjoy art
Hmm.
and all the things that came from that. And I see that with your installation as well. I will say, you know, the one rub I have is because of COVID is that I go into that space, it's huge, and what do I want to see? I want to see it activated with people,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And we have these capacity limitations where we can't have that many people in the space. You know, so there's only so much energy I think that our residency artists can get from folks when they're coming in. And
Sure.
so that's like a little bit of a personal downer for me, because
Yeah. Me
I
too.
want to
A
be in
little bit.
and feel like I'm at a show, you know, I'm at
Yeah.
the club or whatever, you know, because that's what I enjoy, is really being in spaces and getting to be around people and enjoy live music.
Yeah.
And in that, and just visualizing in that space, just could we get 100 people in there? Amazing, but also no, just you know,
yeah, no.
we still got, you know,
Yeah.
uh,
Keep your
the,
mask on.
still got the panini press, and so I'm cool. But also, you know, if we didn't have that, that would be a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, you know, like we said, being able to see what these artists are coming up with, just being given a space for them to experiment and just vibe. You know, there's no set agenda. We've literally just said, here's a space, use it to rehearse, use it to, you know, play around with different sounds, use it to, you know, do cartwheels if you want to, you know what I mean?
For real.
Yeah. And so I just think that that's great, where they can come in with zero obligation, but to just create and be the creative people that they are. And so I'm so excited, it was really an honor to be invited to be a part of this and help bring in the artists for these residencies. And so that's gonna be dope. But I wanted to also, since you were talking about, you know, you talked about Seattle and some of the things that you told me a little bit of a story about how you were introduced to Seattle through one of your favorite artists, who you kind of feature in a way in this exhibit. So can you talk about, again, like how you were introduced to Seattle music, and then your love for Jimi Hendrix and how he inspires your work, his music, him as a musician, all the things?
I mean, you know, Hendrix, I was fortunate enough that I grew up in like, you know, the 70s and 80s and stuff. And when I was a little guy in Queens, my older cousin played in a lot of bands, and I followed him around like a puppy. You know, I worshiped him, and, you know, he'd always kick me to the side, like, get out of here, kid, we're gonna go hang out. But you know, we would listen that's how I got really into music, to be truthful. You know, he had all these records, and I really dug sitting on his bed surrounded by all these albums, just looking at album covers and listening to music and following along the lyrics on those things. And Hendrix, he would tell me, like, this is the greatest guitarist of all time. And I remember saying, like, I love this. What is this? And she was like, this is Jimi Hendrix. And then I discovered that he was, you know, obviously we could spend a whole other hour about the origin of how, you know, Black music inspired or, you know, rock and roll took from whatever that conversation, and that's a whole other political conversation. But, you know, I think that Hendrix at a time was so identified with like the acid rock, heavy rock music thing, which was a very white identified kind of thing. I mean, you had brothers in there, you know, but when I discovered that this dude was a Black dude with this beautiful afro and, you know, that guitar and like the way he would play was it just blew me away. And I became obsessed with Jimi Hendrix. And my cousin played guitar. He tried to play just like him, had the headband and everything, you know. And I think any young kid that loved music at the time, obviously music was really big in our family. Like I said, you know, we're West Indian. So, you know, just a sidebar, if my father got really pissed at us, the first thing one of us would do would run to the turntable and put on some calypso or some reggae or something to draw his attention away from why he was pissed at us, and it would save us an ass whipping. Yeah. So, you know, I put on like Lee Perry, and it's like, you know, suddenly he's like, oh yeah, why am I mad at you again? You know, and that kind of thing. So music was always like a real part of growing up, and Hendrix just became this figure, and for me, he transcended the music and became like an icon. And if you look back, you know, there's a handful of guitarists. Jeff Beck is another one, Eric Clapton, all of those guys that played, but Hendrix wore the crown, like, you know. And that was a brother wearing that crown. And then I discovered, where was he from? He was from Seattle. I was like, Seattle, where the hell is that? Like, you know, when you're a young kid in New York City, you're like, I don't know where Seattle is, but I want to go there because if he's from there, I want to go there. And that became my kind of obsession with Hendrix. And then as I, punk started becoming part of a really interesting amalgam of like reggae. You know, there's a lot of reggae infused into punk music. There's a lot of blues involved in there, which is a lot of like Black music was involved in it. I really the Clash was a really important band for me. I think that the Clash really, fused a lot of different types of music together. And at the same time the Clash was up, hip hop started really being invented down the street from me, basically. So, and when we first started spinning records, you didn't have a Techniques 1200, like you had your mother's, Zenith, some stupid shit with that arm thing going across and whatnot. And you played that, and actually samples and scratch beats were handled very differently. But where they, everybody took your sound was you had to have a depth and a knowledge of music, historical music to actually DJ. So if you were putting on something like, I can't even, Dennis Brown is on one turntable, and then you bring up like Patsy Cline on another one. You're smashing together two different types, completely different types of music. I remember when I discovered Leonard Skinner, man. And, to me, I was like, wow, that's a fabulous record, Leonard Skinner. Now, was I running around with that set? Hell no, but I really liked Freebird and all of those joints because you could cut them and mix them into behind other people's music. And that really, for me, was the fabric of hip hop music, was to be able to have this depth of knowledge to pull up. A close friend of mine is this guy, Rob Swift. You probably know Rob. Was in this group called the Executioners. And the Executioners were turntablists in the 90s and early 2000s. And, Rob is one of the greatest DJs I've ever been around in my whole life. And one day I was at Rob's house in Queens, and oh my God, he had like 4 or 5 turntables. He was like, Gary, come in my room. So I come in his room, and this is like walking into like the palace, because Rob, I might have thought I was DJing. Rob was a DJ. And so he probably had, this is just in his house, Rob probably had like 15,000 records. And so he's playing on one turntable. He's got another joint going on another turntable. And he's looking through 15,000 records for one breakbeat. And I'm like watching this guy like a chef. And he pulls up this record of Battlestar Galactica, right? And I'm like, what the fuck is he doing with Battlestar Galactica? Like, first of all, who has an album of Battlestar Galactica's music? Yeah. So he pulls it out, cues it up, has it already marked on the thing, and sets the needle down. And for like, I don't know, 3 breaks, he has this little sound out of Battlestar Galactica is coming in while he's playing all this stuff. I was just blown away. I was like, God damn, how you can actually catalog a specific breakbeat on an obscure record in your 15,000 record collection, to pull that up just to show me some things that he's been thinking about, is just mind blowing. And, and so we would sit and talk about music and what kind of music we grew up on. And, I was obsessed with Led Zeppelin and, Sly and the Family Stone, and all of these different types of music. And that's really what became early hip hop, was this way of, you know, you look at somebody like Kool Herc or DJ Red Alert, those guys really knew their music, and it was very diverse, the kind of music that they pulled up. And that's one of the things that I love the most. And this dovetails with a conversation that we had the other day, where I think that for us, music became this kind of localized sound that you sort of recognized locales by their sound. You know, their, you know, Chicago had its own sort of sound. Deep New York, that grimy, you know, kind of Mob Deep, you know, Nas, Jay-Z, that kind of thing, that can only come out of New York City. You know, like then you know, you go down to like Houston, Texas, and you start thinking about some of those guys. You know, there's this cat called Killer Kylon down there that's just tearing it up. Dude's unbelievable. But when you listen to his music, it's so Houston that it can't be from anywhere else. You know, you listen to Vitamin D, there's nothing else that he could not come from another city. That's where he's from. You know, and Seattle has, we talked a little bit about the way that the weather kind of like shapes the way that places form their music. And I always loved the way that folks would put together you know, these cassette tapes that we would trade around, and that's how I knew about West Coast stuff. We didn't have the internet to just log on and go, hey, what can I upload from SoundCloud or whatever the fuck, you know, like it was, you needed to know somebody in LA to actually. First time I got an NWA record was like, this guy said, hey, have you heard this cassette? And I was like, what is NWA? That's nonsense. And he was like, I'm telling you, put this on. He put this thing on, and dude, that changed my life right there. I was like, I can't believe these guys in LA are knocking this out. You know, so I'm really going off on a whole lot of different places, but I guess what I want to bring it back to is the way that a locale can be defined, that the sound can really be defined by the location. And I think that's one of the things that's most attractive about Seattle, aside from all the other things, is there's a specific sound. If you even think about grunge, you know, I remember going to a show to see L7 and Mudhoney in New York City, and if you saw, that place was packed. And L7, which is one of my favorite bands, blew Mudhoney off the stage. And you know this feeling, because I know you've seen them 1,000 times, where you know that moment when the lights go down and there's like 2 or 3 seconds between the lights go down and then the first note gets played, and there's a tension in that room of excitement, like what's about to happen. That's what I always wanted to capture. You know, the only thing that ever comes close to it is fashion, you know, because when you go to a fashion show and those lights drop, you know, and suddenly these incredible models with these, you know, visually stunning pieces of fabric come down the stage with the music blaring and all of that. There's nothing like it. It's incredible. And I think that those 3 seconds between lights go down and the music turns on, that's a very special moment. And
Feel it.
you feel it, you know, and you yearn for it, you know, like that's what I want right now. I want to feel that, you know. So that's why I love music. I just love being at any kind of musical event.
One of the things that I say about Seattle is because I agree with what you said, like there is a Seattle sound, yet it's not something that I feel like can be defined, you know, because there are so many things that it's like a mashup, because we are this city that, you know, grunge came out of, was a strong hub for jazz music. You know, just so many different types of folks that are from this city, that have come from the city, that have created sounds that all feed into what the Seattle sound is. And so it's hard to define, but it's something that you know when you hear it.
Yeah.
And so I've never been able to articulate with words like when somebody says, what is the Seattle sound? I'm like, well, I mean, it's vitamin D, I'm saying? Like I can name different,
Yeah.
DJs and producers and performers to say what Nirvana, like those are, but they're all across the spectrum, but when you hear it, that's Seattle. It's, to me, and I'm a Seattle native, so I'm biased, but it's something special. It just really is something special because the influences, I don't feel like folks from Seattle want to sound like anybody else. We don't necessarily emulate a New York sound or a Houston sound. We don't chop and screw, we do our own thing. We take what we like and we make it our own.
As you should.
Yeah.
It's a lot like cooking. I don't know if you like to cook. I love to cook. And it's the similar thing. Like you go to New Orleans, New Orleans is one of the most amazing music, food cities.
Culture.
If I lived in New Orleans, I would look like Dom DeLuise. I'm telling you, I would Biggie would be skinny to me because I would just sit and eat and listen to music. That's all I would do down there.
I mean, if you're gonna be fat and happy, be fat and happy in New York, in New Orleans, because it's literally all the things. You can eat all the good food, you can hear all the good music, you can go to the great shows, there's beautiful art, there's the even the spirituality stuff. I mean, there's just so many things to do and learn and be exposed to that you'll never like cover it all. Even if you live there, like it's beautiful. So
it's just beautiful.
Hey, I'll retire, go be fat and happy in New Orleans.
I love the people, I love the Treme.
Yeah.
I love everything about, like, it's just Black life down in the Treme is just different, man. There's a certain, like, just comfort. Everything is about comfort through struggle. You know what I mean? Like something horrific like Katrina can happen and folks find a way, and
celebrate. We still that I think resilience is really, really shown in a place like that. Black resilience. Because even just in the way that they do memorials and funerals, it's really about celebrating versus mourning.
100%.
It's okay to be sad, but let's not carry that sad energy. Let's celebrate who this person was,
the life.
Honoring their life. And I love that analogy, and I think that feeds into everything that they do. It's just how do we're going to celebrate our taste buds by making
100%
creating delicious food and just all things. And so I think
amazing city. I think circling back to Seattle though, I do think being from the East Coast, I think when I hear something and I kind of know that I might not be able to tag it exclusively as Seattle specific, but there is a Northwest sound that I think, and I might be off on a limb here, but I really feel like listening to Seattle rappers specifically, there's a cadence that's very specific to the locale. And it almost follows a kind of spoken word sort of delivery. And that cadence is very specific to Seattle. And when you put that with the kinds of mixes that are, they're almost, I don't want to say swing, because that like makes it somehow, I can't, the way folks are mixing music is also a little bit different. But I think what anchors it to Seattle is the cadence. I think that's where you get it, and if you're from there, like a lot of times people tell me, like they know that I'm from New York because of my accent. I don't hear my accent, you know, like I'll hear when I get mad, then it totally comes out. But when I was growing up, my mother would say, you know, you can't go out in public and talk like that. That's like, you sound like you're from Queens for the rest of your life. Like you can't just roll your R's and, you know, over and, you know, drop your A, you know, it's just, you have to be aware of it. So, you know, like an East Coast accent, New York specifically, or New Jersey has a kind of specificity. And I think that when I travel, and now I'm living in LA, there is a cadence to the way people talk and rhyme or sing. And I do think that some of the beauty that comes out of the grunge thing, which really I think people ran down the freeway with was the don't take this the wrong way, but I think that when you think about like what you hear a lot about depression that comes around, how the weather affects people's emotions and psychology. I think out of that came a certain sound that became grunge for a disenfranchised group of kids at the time that were producing things in garages and on their own. There was a very DIY aspect to it. There's, you know, if you think about Nirvana gets all the attention, but there's so many other bands like Green River and, like I said, Mud Honey and all these other groups. I believe that, you know, there were very small clubs. I don't know them all off the top of my head, that some of this music came out of, that these guys were kind of in a garage sort of way forming this sound out of a kind of desperation that had the backdrop of this wet, almost damp feeling around you. I mean, even that's where the fashion comes from, you know, like that whole flannel shirt look thing was functional, not, it wasn't just for fashion. So, you know, you kind of just threw on what you had, and suddenly everybody around the country, people in Los Angeles, it's hot as hell, they're still wearing flannel. Right. You know what I mean? Because that's what dudes wear in Seattle. And it's like, yeah, but you're not from Seattle, dude. Like, what are you doing? So there is a definite sound. And when you hear like you know, like a record like Bleach, you know, when I heard that album, I had a girlfriend that was really involved in the music scene back then. And she was like, you're gonna love this. And she gave me Bleach, and it changed it again. That was another one of those like right-hand turns. You're like, God damn, I love this. When there are moments that you can almost remember a band or an album or something changes your direction, you know, and adds to it. It's almost like adding a lane on the freeway. Yeah. And I think that those guys, that's what made them so brilliant, was that their ability to capture something that was so physical and yet psychological at the same time. There was a certain kind of desperation to have a voice being heard. It would be interesting to see, you know, a young Nirvana right now in the political climate that's happening right now, you know, what would come out of it?
Even more than a sound, it's a mood.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Because I would say even across genres, we're a little emo, right? Yeah. And you're right. A lot of that has to do with the weather and just the backdrop. Not to say that our weather is constantly depressing, because it's not. People say it rains all the time. I don't agree with that. It does rain here, but we're very seasonal. But the thing is that when we are in like the fall, winter, like it's dark and it's cold, and like, you know, folks like me are like, I'm lacking vitamin D and I need to get the heck out of here. But that does translate into how people create their art. Not only music, you know. I think across the board, but and that was displayed in grunge, but I think it's also displayed in hip hop for sure, and
Yeah.
other genres of music. You know, I hear a lot of hip hop artists all the time talk about not only the weather, but just the city. You know, the
Yeah.
different parts of the city, and you know, you can understand how the environment affects people in
100%.
ways. And so that's a good point. But yeah, I would call it more of a mood than a
Yeah.
sound, and how that mood comes across. It's like, oh, that's Seattle.
Yeah.
You
See,
know?
that's it. That's it. I think that
Yeah.
you nailed it. I think that that mood translates into, if you're sensitive enough to try to capture it, the mood.
Yeah.
I think that, the same thing with visual art. I think that you think about artists that reach or hold on to things that, like if I was up there for any length of time during those cold periods that you're talking about, immediately comes to mind, I'm start working with blankets, because
Right.
I don't like being
You want to
cold.
feel
So
warm. Yeah.
exactly.
My
You
heat's
know, like,
on. Like,
yeah, start shredding up some wool, man. Like, it's
yeah.
that would be my go-to. So I think that you become, and you can't take those things for granted. And I think that it's also very tactile. Like, you can't. This is one of the things, and I don't mean to bash on the young folks. I think that you got to get out and feel the city, man. Like, you can't produce in your bedroom,
Mhm.
with your hoodie over your head. Like, it's not gonna work. Like, and auto tunes, leave that auto tune shit alone, man. That's like, your voice is great.
You preach
That's what
right now.
is defining you, man. For real. And
Yeah.
it's like, I can't tell. My problem is I can't tell the difference between kids now. Like, I'm listening to something, I don't want to go off on a total bashing thing, but
I was
it
gonna say we
seemed
could
like
take a whole another hour on that and sound like, just annoyed
the
old.
old folks up on the porch. Like, once, like, Drake came in, it just ruined everything, man. Like, that just took it all down, because once you put your voice out there and filter it through the auto tunes, you have taken away your identity voluntarily. And so,
Well, essentially
you know
create a new one too, and so you never give your fans or your listeners an opportunity to really know who you are, because we're always getting
yeah,
a manipulated version of you. And we
but
just
something will come of it, you know what I mean? Like, I think I believe that kids will, they're resilient, you know what I mean? Like, they come up with, and there's always that, like, nah, I'm not having that, I'm doing this, like, there's always the pushback and
yeah.
the swing. And that's what I love about music, is that it's always a reaction to something that came before it. So something good will come out of it. Just gotta leave that auto-tune shit alone, man.
Well,
Unbelievable.
I wanna just make note of the time, because we are at an hour. We don't have to cut this off that quick. But for anybody that's watching, if you have questions, you want to send us a couple of questions to address, please feel free. And I also wanted to ask you or talk about the posters.
Hmm.
Um, in the exhibit as well. I did spot a local poster, and let me just tell you, that poster what's so funny is that poster is from an event that I was involved in.
No way, really?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that was the only local Seattle poster that I could identify within
No,
all of
I
the.
think there's like 5 actually buried in there. There's
Okay.
5
I mean,
locals.
and so I want to ask too about just that process, because they're distorted and some of them were recreated and stuff. But
Hmm.
that the one that I did find, I was like, wait a minute. Because I actually commissioned that design. So that is from a 2010 event
Okay.
called Dope Emporium,
Stop doing that.
which is it was like a community festival. Kind of the community were the people who produced it and put it together, but it was really conceptualized and led by someone named Jace E. Cage, who is an MC. He's with the group Black Stacks. Also, you know, he had a group called the Silent Lambs Project, has been in the game, local hip hop, for a really, really long time, and has also been a huge, like, just community, like, activist person, just involved in so much community work. He's currently involved with, you know, working with young people, and just amazing person. So anyway, he started this Dope Emporium, like, one day festival. And, you know, of course, I used to support a lot of what they were doing. This was like an 8-hour day of just, you know, like, I think that particular one was like over 30 performers, tons of different DJs, several hosts throughout the day. They did producer battles. It was a marketplace, all that. And so I heavily supported with, like, the marketing and promotion. So part of my job was to create the you know, get the graphic done. I don't do graphic design, but I commissioned that with the designer that I worked with at the time. And so, you know, it's in my, you know, collection. And so when I was looking through, I was like, oh, and then once I thought of it, I could see it. I was like, that's really ironic that the one local one that I recognized happened to be something that I was.
Oh, I'll have to try to get you one. I'll try to get you one.
That was really cool. But yeah, can you just while we look to see if any other questions come through, can you talk about the posters that you chose? They're from all over the place, all different types of shows, and then why they are, like, manipulated in the way that they are. One of the things for me, you see, I wear glasses, and I didn't have my glasses on when I went in, and I was telling Mita and Ian at the museum, I was like, this is tripping me out, because this is what my vision is really. When I don't wear my glasses, my vision is very, like, blurry. And so I was like, I don't know if it's my eyes or if it's, you know, the way it's supposed to look. I put my glasses on and figured it out. But yeah, can you talk about just why first of all, the posters that you chose, do you have any, like, any personal connections with any of those show posters? You know, were you at any of those shows? And
you know, I never thought about it. Have I been? You know, like, those posters from the time I was young, I was always drawn to them. You know, I was, you know, obviously I was really drawn to art. So anything like that on the street that drew your attention, you know, like street teams and stuff like that had to put up something and draw attention to get folks to come to their shows. So some of those posters were just amazing. And, you know, we used to rip them down and try to save them, clip them out, do whatever, and stick them on your wall in your room. And, or if you were at a show, you'd kind of try to, you know, seek out and find one of the posters and rip it down and put it in your room. And it just became something over a course of time that I kind of collected. So some of them I collected, some of them I, you know, now, since I'm so involved with them, people send me them from time to time. And what I do with them, you know, some of them are downloaded. I think that I was looking for local Seattle bands and obscure things and hip hop things and for the show. And that's probably how I stumbled across that. And so I'll take some of those images and then I manipulate them through the computer, different filters. That's how I get those, like, super saturated colors. And you know, like, if you think back to, like, some of the late 60s, those, like, acid trippy ones that look like the Hendrix albums, you know, like I loved the graphics on all of those. So I'll take even something like a black and white poster for a band and then, you know, totally manipulate it, change the colors up. I'll do, like, some really saturated canary yellow next to you know, electric magenta and bump that up, and then I'll put some kind of blur effect on it, so you can read. A lot of it gets erased, so some of the images, for me, it's up to the viewer to piece those slippages and erasures that happen, to piece it back together. And for me, that we didn't really get too into the erasure part of my work, but that really is where it started, was about kind of erasing a stereotype, was the original where it came from. So they were, a lot of them were cartoons and things of that nature. And I think that concept or idea of erasure to Black history it runs side by side. Like a lot of our history is totally erased, and so we're forced into a position of trying to reconnect those tissues back together, and recompleting some of those kind of abstracted, blurry areas from the past. And that's really where the erasure stuff comes from. And so I use that in the poster to allow for an avenue for folks that, like yourself, that walk in and see something, maybe something they were involved in, and there's bits and traces of it, and enough of it for you to know that was something that you were involved in. But then a lot of it is erased and created into something else, because I think that our memory sort of works that way. Like the first time that you and I talked is now a memory, and the actual is very different than how both of us remember it. And I think that's one of the interesting things about us as human beings, is like we have the same experience, but we experience it very different. So
I love what you've done with the posters, and I'm just so glad that you explained it in this way, and I hope for folks that haven't been able to get out to the Henry to see it, please go see it, because one, you're drawn in just by those vibrant colors, right? And so that's like, those colors smack you in the face and you're like, what is this? What's going on here? Then you get close. For me, it was like, okay, I walk in, I'm like, oh shit, and then I walk up to the pieces, and I'm looking at them, and I'm literally like looking at them this close to try to identify. And it really was going through that process of, oh, these are blurry, or these, these aren't clear. You have to figure this out. And so it's something that you can really take your time with, to see is there anything that you recognize? Maybe there's not anything that you recognize, but what can you make out of all of this,
Exactly.
And then within that, even if there were obviously show posters that you had from all across the country. And so there was band recognition, there were names that I recognized, but of course, shows that I wasn't at, and being able to see, kind of make out like what these were. Some were dated, and you can kind of see what moment of time these things might have happened. And it's just a really cool experience to go take your time, sit with it. And again, there may be some recognition, there might not be, you could just be learning from looking at posters. And
I'm glad you had that experience.
I love posters, for folks like us, show posters are nostalgic, and for a lot of folks, like collector's items, right? One of the things that I mentioned, there's a venue here that came to mind when I was looking at the pieces, because they would often have framed posters of past shows that were at the venue. And so that wall would just grow with more and more posters.
Nice.
So when you go into the venue, you're there for whatever show you're there for, but you're also getting the opportunity to kind of sit with history, because it's a venue that had been around for a long time. And so so many folks locally, nationally, internationally have performed in that space. And so to be in there, you might just be at a little local show and be looking at posters, of huge bands, that have come through. And so I just love that connection, the things that it'll bring up for different people based on their relationship with music and with art.
For sure. It's the ghosts of the past, it's like, they're with you all the time.
Yeah. So my mama is watching.
Oh, no way.
And she threw a question into the Q&A, and
Okay.
she's quite the art buff. And she said that the engine room is reminiscent of the, first of all, do you know who Theaster Gates? Do you
Oh
know?
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
We're good friends.
Exactly. Who is he not
Yeah.
friends with? But she said it's reminiscent of the record store exhibit that he did here at the Seattle Art Museum several years ago. And so she wanted to know if there's any symbolic relationship between the two of you guys. And so you guys are friends. Have you guys inspired each other's work at all, or worked together?
We have, we've been in a lot of shows together. Me and Theaster, we run together in the same crew, I inspire, we work in different, on different tracks, but I think that there is some similarity in, Theaster's involvement with music, and he actually plays.
Mhm.
For me, for the most part, I'm never in the exhibition itself, like for instance, for this and everywhere that it goes, and then there's a sister to this called the Black Ark, which is a Jamaican sound system piece, and that travels and people perform on that. And in both cases, the garage and the sound system, the performances get recorded by video, and that gets cataloged, and so that becomes part of the history of the piece. So we show that a lot of times on a flat screen. This is for the garage. This is the first venue, so there is no videotape prior to this, but from here on it will. So so like the tones become part of the piece. It's kind of it's like the posters. They just get kind of stacked on. And by the way, I would love to have one of the Tones posters, or like the Diggables. That would be amazing, because then I would do something with it. Bang, it would be in the piece. But I drifted off. Yeah, I think that the astronaut. We've been in stuff in Venice. It's a trip to travel and be with your friends and see what they came up with for things in a totally different country. That's one of the really cool things about being an artist and having, a lot of, or we'll have a dinner party and he might be in town and boom, he'll come over. It's a real, it's a lot like the music scene. I think that there's a tight fraternity and you're all very close, even if you approach your work from different sides of the planet.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, well, it's 6:20. I do want another question came through. We'll do that question, and then God, and there's so much more that
I know we could keep going. That's the thing.
we said that the other day. We were like, we could easily have a 2-3 hour conversation.
Oh yeah, you have to cut me off, man. I'll just keep
Well,
talking.
I mean, I love it. I mean, I'm having a great time. I feel like we need to do a part 2.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
hey,
let's do one. We can do that.
Later on in the run, we might need to do this.
Yeah.
But a question came through, and you addressed this a little bit, but it says, can you talk about the influence of Lee Scratch Perry's work, or can you reference the Jamaican dance hall sound system histories and the prevalence of hand-painted posters that are produced out of that?
Well, I have a piece called Reconstructing Memories of the Black Ark, which that's the sister piece, and that's what kind of gave way to the garage happening. That sound was really, that whole piece was inspired by Lee Perry and his studio, which famously burned down twice. Lee smoked a fair amount of weed, and so it's the myth is that he burned it down smoking weed. Now nobody really knows that. Lee's a very unique individual. I did have the opportunity to have him. He was invited to play. He happened. The Ark was in Switzerland And somehow Lee was in Switzerland, and somebody said, can we get him to play? And I just didn't think it was the right venue for Lee to play on that piece, because it was during an art fair, and it just seemed strange to have Lee Perry play at an art fair, and too rarefied. So so I might have blown my chance to actually have the legend play on my piece, but I just couldn't put him in that position to do that. It just felt uncomfortable. But I think that the DIY-ness of it, the way that a lot of the things that I make, I try to keep as lo-fi as possible. And I think that embeds the spirit of Lee Perry. I think the way that dub and early reggae was a very kind of sound that was created by local objects and sounds around you. You know, you would take like a chain link fence and record that, or you could take some old drum and hit that and you know, get an echo off of that sound. And so I think that those kinds of things, that kind of DIY, reach for something that's very, the economy of it is important. That's why I think that music is the same thing. The economy really makes the music that richness. It's like that jambalaya that you make in New Orleans. It's like, if you don't have that down, you can't create that shit in some 5-star Michelin restaurant. It's just not going to work. Like, it's got to be that pot that has that rich sort of history of food in it that creates the extra to the jambalaya. And I think that art is the same thing. Like for the Ark, it was the first time I did it was in New Orleans. So I asked somebody to go around and retrieve all this wood that was from all the houses that were destroyed during Katrina and repurpose it and make these big stacked systems out of it. So the Ark is all made out of Katrina wood that was left behind from destroyed houses in the Treme. So I just wanted to create something positive out of something so negative. And that's why I love the Ark. So I'll never sell the Ark, because it's something that means something so deeply to me. I can't imagine somebody else owning it. And so I think that carries over into the garage. I think those posters, the way that people put them down, the way you include other folks to come in and do that, like making those. We had a lot of folks from the school itself come in and help put the posters on, and people were excited to actually be involved in the installation of the thing. And that's kind of what you want to achieve. You don't want to make it all precious and like that. So I think that DIY thing is really important to keep the richness of the project going.
I love it. Well, like I said, I mean, there's so many other things we haven't even touched on, because you have the block, you have, and then again, the B-sides piece, which is another thing that I just was like, right up against. And it's I love like the simplicity of your work, but how much it brings out, and art is up for interpretation. And so,
absolutely.
everybody's going to receive this installation different. And I think that that's what's really awesome about the work that you've done is, it's relative. It has that simplicity about it, but there's so much depth in it. It's almost like you're peeling back layers as you're in there experiencing the exhibit. And so I really appreciate your work.
Well, thank you. And thank you for it really comes a lot. The engine starts up when the programming happens. So the selection of folks that you guys came up with is amazing. That's one of the things that I really love about this thing too, because I have no idea who's coming in or who's gonna play, and and it's kind of amazing to watch other folks respond to the work that way and then take it from here. It's almost like when you run those what do you call them, relays, and then the person like hands you the baton and you pass it on, and it's kind of there's something kind of beautiful about that. And it really, that engine really revs up and comes to life once those guys get in there and start playing and doing their residency. So
I'm really excited for you to be able to, I mean, I'm excited to see the stuff myself, but even for you to be able to see the recorded content
yeah.
of each residency. You know, thank you, Henry, for inviting me to be a part of this and support this program and bring in other artists and working alongside Bubba Jones as well, who played a big part in.
Oh, nice.
He and I really were like, we know a lot of the same people. And so when it came down to figuring out which folks would participate in these residencies, it was like we were both in agreement, like, okay, yeah, this
Nice.
is gonna go. And I'm really excited for how the final one is going to come together. Shamim mentioned that earlier, but it's something where we had a gig that was just like an improv gig called Jambalaya back in the day, and that's where all the musicians and singers and everybody would just kind of come in. It was a club scene and somewhat structured and somewhat of an open mic jam session kind of thing.
Nice.
So we're recreating that energy with a lot of the folks that actually participated in it.
Nice.
So I'm really excited to see how that comes together, because it's not a band. You know, we have Black Tones, who is a band. We have Ish, who's coming through, who's a band in himself. And then we have this group of folks who are just going to come in and create in this space. And so
that's cool, man. That's going to be nice.
Yeah, each of the residencies are just very unique. They're all going to be really different. And so I'm just really excited for all these folks to be able to interact with the installation and with your work and see what they come up with and see how your work inspires their work. So,
very cool. Thank you.
Thank you for everything that you do, for agreeing to be commissioned for this work here in Seattle, allowing us to be the first ones to present.
I wouldn't want anybody else to have it, so that's cool.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
it feels, Shamim for bringing
really
me in.
Special. Yeah, and thank you, Shamim. Like, she's the one.
Cheers to Shamim.
Yeah, speaking of which, please come back, Shamim, because we'll just keep going.
That's true.
I think Gary and I will just keep going if you don't come back.
I'm perfectly happy to I'm around in my sunny room here listening to y'all, and it's like I was just texting with someone who's also watching that somehow you actually make it feel like a real conversation on Zoom, which rarely happens. So I just thank you so much for that. Thanks to everybody who's here. I'm sure you all still would like to hear. Maybe we will do a round two. I still feel like there's lots of questions out there, but in the interim, Jazmyn and Gary both, thank you for this wonderful time that we get to spend with you, and a little bit of a glimpse in some of your thoughts and ways of working. And again, everyone, don't forget that the Black Tones public performance part will be streamed live on our YouTube channel on the 29th of this month, which I believe is next Saturday. I think I'm getting that right. I'm trying to find my calendar and the too many things open here. But yeah, so please tune in or keep an eye out. Sign up for the Henry newsletter if you haven't already. Imagine you have if you're here. And keep an eye out for the next two residencies. There's lots more to come. So thank you, Gary. Thank you, Jazmyn. And
thank you, guys.
Have a great evening.
Jazmyn, thank you. This was great.
Gary, this was so much fun.
Take care.
Thank you.